Kia ora, afternoon, everybody. Um, tuia, tui ki runga, tui ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia. Kia ora, everybody, and welcome along to the Tui o Pito Ora New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects discussion series webinar about the State of the City report for Tāmaki Makaurau. A little about me. Ko monga kiki te moanga, ko Tāmaki te moana e te awa, ko Matthew Jones toko ingoa. It's my pleasure to be here to MC and moderate this session. As I say, my name is Matthew Jones. I am a landscape architect on the board of the NZILA, and I'm Auckland born and bred. So this topic is well and truly well in my warehouse. So I'm very excited to have this group along today. So the State of the City, benchmarking Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland's international performance 2023 is the first of its kind for a New Zealand city. It is a comprehensive report initiated by the Committee for Auckland in partnership with Deloitte and Tātaki Auckland Unlimited to be undertaken annually. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's online seminar. Now, I'm not sure if you can see the names of us respectively, but on my screen, we are all Anthony Ruakiri, but I can promise you we're not all the same person. But first off, so Mark Thomas. Mark leads Service Works, which specializes in smart mobility, city digitization strategies, and urban development opportunities. He is a regular international speaker and commentator on these issues. Mark is a director on the Committee for Auckland and NZ Tech, and he is the immediate past chair of ASEAN New Zealand Business Council. Welcome, Mark. We also have Pam Ford. Pam is a director of economic development at Tātaki Auckland Unlimited. Pam has a distinguished career in economic development, receiving the commendation for distinguished service from the Economic Development New Zealand in 2019. Pam has worked for many years championing New Zealand's economic growth, both domestically in several offshore markets and through her work with the Ministry of Economic Development, NZTE, and Auckland Council. And Anthony Ruakiri. Anthony is a partner of operations and transformation at Deloitte. Anthony brings more than 20 years' experience delivering systemic and political change in pursuit of addressing socio-economic and inequities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. He supports organisations to develop and implement strategies and frameworks that deliver on their own aspirations, whilst at the same time improving outcomes for Māori and Aotearoa New Zealand as a whole. So yes, I welcome and kia ora all to our three speakers today. We're going to have, each of the speakers is going to run through a quick presentation, and then there will be some Q&A at the end of the discussion. Now, if you have any questions, we will wait to the end, and please put these into the Q&A menu. So on your Zoom screen, if you hover over the screen at the bottom, there is Q&A. So please put any questions in there, and then there is an opportunity to upvote. So if you see a question that you think someone else has written that's worthwhile, then click on that and it'll get a little bit of a higher priority. And please note that the chat function in this korero today is not working. It's not functioning for distraction purposes. Now, first about the study. Now, this is Auckland's first international benchmark. And over the past decade, Auckland has ranked well on the global livability measures, which is drawing visitors, businesses, and investments from around the world. But reduced connectivity, innovation, and skills challenges, and a lot slower pandemic recovery compared to other parts of the world has tested our resilience. Now, more than ever, we must task ourselves with what Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland needs to do to improve our competitiveness, well-being, and resilience, of all of which contribute to New Zealand's prosperity as a whole. So for the first time, the State of the City benchmarking Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland's international performance, it sheds light on the significance of Auckland's position in the world as competition intensifies for talent, investment, and visitors. It celebrates our strengths in the natural environment, destination appeal, and diversity, whilst also pinpointing areas where improvement is needed. such as innovation, opportunity, and knowledge. So as I mentioned earlier, today we're going to hear from each of our speakers on their unique perspectives as part of this study. They will provide findings on the report, and they will outline where they see our city's biggest opportunities and challenges lie. As I say, as we hear from each, we'll open the floor. After we've heard from each, we'll open the floor and we'll answer some questions. So again, please use that Q&A function on the bottom of the screen. So first of all, we'd like to hear from Mark to share his insights, which will be then followed by Pam and finally Anthony. So thanks very much all, and I hand over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thanks so much for the introduction and the very warm welcome. And can I start by thanking the NZILA for being interested enough to profile this report. We were lucky when it launched in August that we received a tremendous amount of interest in the report, more than we expected. And I think that's probably emblematic of the fact that, Auckland matters to Aucklanders, obviously, but with almost 38% of the GDP of New Zealand, it matters for the country too. And that was one of the conclusions in the report, of course, that big cities like them will not matter. And so I suppose if I sort of talk firstly about my involvement and the committee's involvement, I mean, the committee's a membership organisation, been around for more than 20 years, had lower profile recently, but we're a membership organisation that kind of looks at, I think, the future of Auckland. We look less about the things that aren't working today and more about what needs to happen to make Auckland stronger in the future. And we've got a mix of business, not-for-profit and government members who are charged with that. And the context for us initiating the State of the City report was actually the Reimagining Tāmaki Makaurau piece of work that Sir Peter Gluckman's Research Institute at Auckland University, KOI2, produced last year. That was commissioned by Tātaki Auckland Unlimited, which is the council-controlled organisation in Auckland responsible for economic development and culture, and Pam's one of the leaders of that organisation. That was the catalyst for us thinking about what we could do on the committee. For those of you who don't remember that report, it had 9 big ideas for action for Auckland, and some of which may be of interest to your members were making Auckland a region of more human-focused infrastructure and a region of integrated precincts. Those were 2 of the 9 ideas. But the one that caught our eye was this idea of a more enabled opportunities. So Sir Peter's report had a section on what do we need to do to enable change. We've got these 9 ideas, but what do we need to do to make them happen? And one of the big things was a stronger relationship between central government and Auckland, because that's been a bit of a barrier, a bit of an impediment. In New Zealand, we have one of the lowest amounts of public services distributed by councils. So councils in New Zealand have a far more modest share of activity compared to other OECD countries. The central government kind of controls most of the levers, right? And one of the things we, I suppose, landed on was this idea of benchmarking. That came partly also because of the committee's relationship with our sister and brother cities in Australia. We're part of a group called the Committees for Cities and Regions. So that includes all the capital cities in Australia and some regional areas too, so Sydney, Melbourne, etc. Some of them had started doing benchmarking as a way of trying to just put an agenda for action on a regular basis up for state governments, or in our case, the national government. And the agency doing that was a group called the Business of Cities. They're based in the UK, but they've had an involvement with Auckland since 2010, actually since the amalgamation of the super city. And their founder, Professor Greg Clark, had been involved actually in some of the establishment. I'd met Greg. I was an elected member of one of the local boards in Auckland at the time. And so it was a combination, I suppose, of some of our sister cities in Australia doing this benchmarking tool, seeing the impact it could have on, in Australia's case, state governments, by, I think, having a kind of a group of people come together saying, these are the challenges, this is what needs to be done. And then having the Business of Cities with kind of skin in the game in Auckland. That was the catalyst for us then going to market, as it were, to say, well, who'd be interested? And Tātaki were sort of first on board, and Deloitte also. We've also got support from KOI2, of course, and the Auckland Policy Office. which is actually the New Zealand government in Auckland. That's the kind of coordinating part of IMBI. So those are the 5 of us who are involved. That was the catalyst for why we started to do this thing. It'll be an annual report, but of course we also want to keep momentum moving. So we've got a quarterly update coming out shortly. And in terms of the big outtakes, just briefly, I suppose the summary for those perhaps who haven't seen it is best exampled by this image I'm bringing up now. This shows the 10 pillars that we measured. So if we think of it as a clock moving around from 12, we have opportunity, prosperity, innovation and knowledge, down the bottom, culture and experience, place and connectivity, resilience, and sustainability. If you Google State of the City, you'll come to our website and you'll see the report there. Look, it's a large report, but it's quite easy to read and I think quite graphical. But these are the 10 pillars that we're measuring. And so the obvious immediate outtakes are we're below the waterline, as it were, below our peer city average in 4 of these areas. The peers we talked about are 9 cities around the world that we measure ourselves against, 3 in Europe, 3 in North America, and 3 in wider Asia, cities like Vancouver and Copenhagen and others. And in the areas of sustainability, connectivity, which means transport, opportunity, and also knowledge, we're below average for peers. We're only just sort of above the water with prosperity. We're kind of, okay with place and also with resilience. And we're towards leading with sustainability and experience. But the big message was, even in the areas where we're strong, like sustainability, we've actually got a lot of work still to do. One of the things that was commented on was the climate action plan that's been put up for Auckland that looks good on paper, but without activity won't happen. So just to conclude my section, the last big outtakes, I think, for me were this need for a mature relationship with government. And we've actually got an event coming up with the Mayor of Auckland, Wayne Brown, on his manifesto that he put up before the election on this idea of city deals, which is something the new government's talked about as a way of potentially formalising and making more productive the relationship between Auckland Council and the central government. The second thing is, even though we've got the weaknesses, we've got to continue to do activity in other areas. So perhaps areas such as place, experience, and connectivity, which might be of particular interest to your members. Those are areas also where, in the case of place and experience, we're doing okay. We've still got work to do. We can talk some more about that. And the last thing is that council and government cannot fix this. And that's been the history of other cities. It's always needed other groups to get involved. And so what we're trying to champion is groups like yours and others thinking, well, what in this are we interested in? What are we passionate about? What do we have expertise in? And what can we perhaps do some more work on to help make more progress on? And as we get into the talk, we can perhaps give some examples of some of the things that we're doing. We might leave it there if it's okay. And I think I'm handing over, is it to Pam, it looks like.
Thank you, Mark, and tēnā koutou katoa. I'd like to thank you, Mark, Matthew, and Laurie and Angela, and certainly the NZILA members for tuning in today. It's a great pleasure for Mark and Anthony and myself to be able to share this piece of work. And as Mark just said, it's about making this information available to everybody who has an interest in making Auckland in this instance a much better place for Aucklanders, but also to ensure that we keep attracting investment and talent. So I'm from Tātaki Auckland Unlimited, and we are the economic and cultural agency for the region. And so we sit as a separate organisation, a council-controlled organisation with our own board, but we're very much directed by the mayor and councillors. And my area of interest and energy all goes into how we make Auckland a better place, more prosperous, better jobs for Aucklanders, and how we attract investment. And so this report really as Mark said, runs off a lot of work that's already been done or other research. And we were really thrilled when Mark and Committee for Auckland picked up the baton and said, let's do a benchmarking study. So our involvement was, yes, we're in. That is fantastic. And certainly it was fantastic that Deloitte joined as well. So it's a really great tripartite, if you like. The involvement of our team was really supporting the data and analysis. We have an economic insights team who really look at the future, providing a series of photos and all of the video material and media support to make this come alive. So all three parties added their bits to make this a really a good promotion. We're thrilled that people like yourselves have picked it up. In terms of the outtakes, I've just got a few points to build on what Mark was saying. Certainly the report shows that over the last 10 years, there's been significant change in Auckland compared to those peer cities. And if I just run through those peer cities, so you've got them top of mind if you haven't seen the report. So we've got Brisbane and Fukuoka, who are both partner cities of Auckland. So we have a lot to do with them, particularly Fukuoka in terms of startups and digital. Brisbane, we have a lot to, and I'll mention Brisbane a bit later on. And Tel Aviv, another tech capital. Copenhagen, Helsinki, and Dublin. And then Vancouver, Portland, and Austin. So those are the 9 cities that are comparable in terms of a number of factors. And while the last 10 years we have done great things, we are not advancing at the pace of some of our peer cities. So if we think about the great work that's gone on in Auckland that some of you may be involved in around Wynyard Quarter or some of the waterfront work, from our team's point of view, we're very invested in Wynyard Quarter as an innovation centre. That's all well and good, but we've got to keep pushing ahead and think about what the future 20 years looks like. So one of the outtakes for me was this is very aligned to what the focus of our work is, which is what is the future? What are those things that we need to be ahead of the game of and help industry and both government ensure that Auckland is still on the radar, attracting that mobile group of talent that we want to come here, ensuring the investment comes into the city. A second area or outtake was really our peer cities, particularly those in Australia and Brisbane, are competing really aggressively with us, targeting our talent, our brightest and best, certainly targeting things like major events, targeting big projects. And having just been in Brisbane last month, compared to maybe being there 10 years ago, you can really feel the vibrancy, the progression. They're all galvanised around Brisbane 2032. Looking at that Brisbane South Bank, I mean, gosh, the input from your profession, the whole architecture, making that a space and place for people to do all sorts of things. It's just incredible. So we really have quite a bit to do in terms of competing just from, Brisbane. And I guess the other outtake is it really fuels us in terms of how we engage with government, and Mark made this point also. It is a call for action and it enhances the need to align more with central government or have central government understand what Auckland needs to continue to be the international city that it is for the benefit of all of New Zealand. And so for our work, which is also about promoting and attracting visitors as much as business conferences and investment and talent, it really gives us the kind of energy to keep driving forward some of those place development activities that we're looking at doing, and I'll talk about some of those in the next question. So I guess, overall the outtake for me was that amongst those 10 domains that we saw earlier, 6 out of 10 were above the line, above average, which is good, but there are some really sharp challenges we have to continue to compete with the cities that we have to in order to do that attraction of investment and talent. So with that, I'll hand over to Anthony for his perspective to share with you, and come back with answer the other questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I'll tuatahi tēnei te mihi ki a koutou ko tai mai tēnei hui. Nau mai haramai, nau mai hoki mai ki te kōrero nei. Ko ai ahau, who am I? Ko taranaki rawa ko hikurangi o ku maunga, ko te mata nehu rawa ko te waiapu o ku awa, ko parihaka puniho o a kura rawa ko karuai o ku marae, no taranaki tiatia o Ngāti Porou, rawa ko te aitanga mahaki, ko Anthony Ruakere tōku ingoa. So thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name's Anthony Ruakere. I am from the East Coast, the East Cape in particular, where my mother is from, but I grew up in Taranaki, or at Parihaka, where my father is from. And I now live in Tāmaki Makaurau with my whānau, and I'm a partner at Deloitte, and we were one of the, as has already been said today, we were one of the co-sponsors of this initiative, of this work, and will remain heavily involved as we continue to develop the content. Here at Deloitte, I lead it's called Haurua Pairo. And Haurua Pairo is our Māori services or Māori sector practice. We have a very clear interest in understanding and advancing or improving the outcomes and impacts for our people. And it is largely through that lens that I have come to this conversation, and through that lens that I contributed to the construction of this report. So for me, the report says a number of things, a number of which I will come to a little bit later in this discussion, but something front of mind for me is that in our keenness to become a future-focused, a future-ready global city, the report provides a good chance, in my opinion, to stop and consider the foundations of the city, and more intentionally and more authentically commit to having that foundation better reflected visually, culturally, architecturally, and in particular, have it reflected in the prosperity of its people. So for those of you who aren't aware, and I don't think many are aware, so indulge me for a moment, but in 1840, a Ngāti Whātua, who are the tribe here or one of the tribes here in Auckland, Ngāti Whātua leader Titai foretold through a prophecy called Hiaha Te Hau, foretold of the arrival of settlers on the shores of the Waitemata. Paramount Chief Apihai Te Kāwau, in heeding that prophecy, invited Governor Hobson and settlers to establish a new capital here and share in the bounty of the area. So that was back in 1840. However, in spite of that hospitality and that welcome and manaki, which is a key principle and concept that was employed by Ngāti Whātua, despite that hospitality and manaki, within 60 years, the tribe were virtually landless on their own lands, and to this day continue to be disproportionately impacted relative to their settler counterparts. And those impacts manifest socially, economically, environmentally, and culturally. So an initial outtake for me is that we should use the insights that have been developed through this report, and we will continue to develop. We should use those to help us address that gap, or help us to address those disproportionate impacts. First and foremost, And the reason why I gave that very brief potted history of the settlement of Tāmaki Makaurau is that we should anchor our city in the story of its origins more effectively than we have today. So the report reveals a lot. However, much of what is revealed from an Indigenous comparative perspective is not surprising or particularly new. The benefit of doing it as we have, though, is that it places much of that material in one place. But it does, and it shows that Māori and Auckland compare unfavourably, again, unsurprisingly, but Māori and Auckland compare unfavourably with respect to workplace inclusion or workforce inclusion, income parity, home ownership, higher education, relative to their non-Indigenous peers. What might be a little surprising, though, particularly for those who carry the view that we do well here in New Zealand in advancing Indigenous rights and interests, is that we don't actually compare that well with Indigenous populations in some of the peer cities across some of the measures. And we'll come to a little bit of that later on, perhaps in some of the questioning. But for me, those are the key high-level outtakes that I take from the report, and that we should be better at anchoring our understanding of the story of the city in its history, and we shouldn't be surprised by some of the outcomes that have been revealed through the report. So I'll leave it at that for the moment and pass back to Matt, I believe.
Yes, thanks all. Thank you, thanks Anthony, Pam and Mike for the words there. So yeah, it's a really interesting study, and it's given some really interesting insights into where we as a city stand now and where we think we need to go and how we can learn from those challenges. So I've got a couple of questions to get us started. So as I say, please feel free to put questions into the chat, into the Q&A function, sorry. So Mark, you noted that Auckland measured below some of our peer cities in the areas of connectivity, innovation, and knowledge, and also opportunity. But we're also average in prosperity. How does Auckland overcome those challenges?
Sure. Well, the first thing is we can't do it alone. And if we look at what other cities have done, there needs to be obviously a sector-specific focus, right? So we've got to have people with the sector knowledge involved in the solutions. And I think we do have to think about doing things a bit differently. That's maybe a bit of a truism. But by definition, right, we've got to where we've got because we haven't made enough progress or done enough. Which is, not putting aside, of course, the fact that there's a huge amount of work that's underway. I mean, council has a vast amount of sort of projects underway. But what we know we need to do in those areas that are holding us back is new things. And so if we think about connectivity, in Sir Peter's report, they had a sort of a category which talked about there needing to be what they called a region of human-focused infrastructure, transport, and housing. Those are quite a few words. It means we need to sort of use digital technology more strongly. And so what the committee is doing is supporting an initiative to have a digital twin pilot established in central Tāmaki. And this, again, may be of interest to your members, because I'm sure a number of you will know a digital twin is becoming an increasingly used planning tool in cities around the world. New South Wales is a very comprehensive one. We've got elements of that in Christchurch and Wellington, but it's not something that we use nationally. And what Becca, working with Panuku, which is the development agency within Auckland, and others, have put together a consortium to support a specific project in this area, which would help improve our connectivity. Connectivity certainly means transport, but it also has that digital element too, right? Where if we can digitally plan, we can take account of one of the things the State of the City talked about, that we're not planning effectively. They certainly mean we're not planning effectively with our infrastructure, our hard infrastructure, but actually the message is also around the digital infrastructure too. So that's a sort of a specific example of taking that sector approach. And then actually in this case, getting a group of public and private organizations that understand the issue, have a stake in it, getting them prepared to, in this case, invest some money to make more progress. Another example, I referred to it briefly in the introduction, is this idea of city deals. This is a sort of a policy tool that's developed in the UK and in Australia over the last 10 years. And it's where national governments sort of enter into particular contracts with where you've got three levels in the case of Australia: state and local councils for key projects. So, for example, it could fund specific infrastructure, but it can fund a great deal more. In the UK, they've been doing this for, as I say, 10 years. Edinburgh, for example, has a city deal with both the Scottish government and the UK government on innovation. So they've actually got effectively government funding for agreed specific investment in things like innovation clusters. That's something that we're really lacking in Auckland. There was a recent report some of people might have seen from a group called Uptake New Zealand, which said, unlike Israel or Singapore or Denmark or Ireland, countries we compare to, we don't have this sort of cluster supporting innovators. Kiwi innovators are too often left to their own devices, and Kiwis do pretty well, right? Because we're lucky we've got smart people. But if you want to be more effective with innovation, you've got to have this ecosystem which has places where people can go, collaborate, work together, that isn't very expensive and is quite accessible. So that's another example of something that I hope will come out of both the combination of the city deal policy the new government's talking about, but also the manifesto ideas that Wayne Brown put up. And as I mentioned, we've got at the end of the month an event with Wayne Brown, and we're going to do a panel on city deals as a way of saying, well, what are the priorities? What do we need to be focused on? So I guess, Matthew, those are sort of some examples, right, of trying to be specific with the challenge. And in this case, doing some different things. And to some extent, not worrying too much about what government's doing or what council's doing or what they're not doing. I think too often it's inevitable, right? Isn't it? All of us intersect with those two groups, and sometimes we don't do things because I know there's a sense council won't permit it or government won't let us. And look, obviously these two agencies control a lot, but what we're trying to do with this thing is make progress anyway, or as much progress as we can.
So in relation to so you've got conversations with Wayne Brown and the council upcoming, and there's a manifesto there, and then a new government, which we might get in the coming days, weeks, months, who knows. In relation to the city deal, obviously you say that kind of sits not all with them, but who does it sit with? Because someone's got to continue to push on this. So how does that kind of work without having, the energy and the enthusiasm out the back of this study?
Sure. Well, the study is a permanent thing, and it'll be annual, and we're going to do quarterly updates as well. So that I suppose the point of that is to kind of have this gentle, supportive pressure coming from the study, telling us what we need to do, and also trying to highlight what the other cities are doing around the world. And then what that needs to be then is a catalyst for the specific project, like how a city deal develops. And the committee, for example, has already been contacted by the incoming government to kind of give some advice about how city deals might be structured. And that's another sort of role we have. We're lucky in Auckland, we've got lots of expertise. I mean, Anthony's team, obviously, at Deloitte, Tātaki too. So there are sort of groups like all three of ours, and others who've got insights to bring. And I suppose what we want to do at the committee is try to help guide, support, and where possible focus, because one of the challenges Auckland has is even though we may have amalgamated 13 years ago, there's still lots of different views about how to do things. I mean, that's inevitable, right, in a democracy. So, we don't want to stomple on that. But what we want to make sure is we're making sort of effective guidance. And so we've got people who've got the same general kind of goals. Let's get them together and provide sort of focused, specific advice to council and government that's useful for them, so we can get quicker progress.
Thanks, Mike. I got a question for Pam. Now, there's a big focus on regeneration as part of this in Tāmaki's development. And so given the results of this study and how we see things might be hopefully progressing forward and, the initiatives to go there, how do you see the role for landscape architects in some of this regeneration and the priorities that come with that?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Well, goes without saying that landscape architecture and architects, contribute hugely to regeneration and how a place is, accessed by your holistic view of the world, designing spaces that are accessible and attractive, and the way people use space. And I guess maybe landscape architecture is something that people sometimes don't even notice, but it makes them feel better and it makes the place feel better. So you see that reflected, I guess, if you really read into the report, in a number of the areas or chapters. I'm thinking about the chapter around culture and experience, and it talks about how people's experience of walking in the city, interacting with nature, and so how can landscape architecture add to that experience? I remember many years ago living in Wellington when the redevelopment around by Schaefer's Park and that work that Megan Raitt did with the reeds and the walkways, and that was revolutionary for citizens of Wellington at that time, because we had this beautiful nature meets urban experience. So really, really significant. Certainly in the place and connectivity chapter, it talks about the built form in Auckland is less efficient and effortless compared to core peers. So again, how can landscape architecture support a better experience around the built form? And certainly in the resilience section, where we surprisingly ranked quite well, and apparently in spite of the floods in January in Auckland, they could have been a heck of a lot worse, but for the water infrastructure in place, which is a bit of a surprise to people, a bit like the sustainability. And I see we've got a question which we can answer later around that. But the floods, the heat waves that are coming, all of those challenges, I think it's imperative that landscape architecture is front and centre of how we develop better place making to improve that resilience. So, I think it goes without saying, the role for landscape architecture and in these region plans is certainly significant.
Well, we as a profession in our absolute day-to-day, those are the key elements of the way we comprehend, study, analyze the landscape in a pure city sense, in a rural sense, in an urban sense, and then all it's all one landscape, and how we kind of look at what those key components are around placemaking, how it works for people, how it works for environment, biodiversity, etc. So if you look at those factors that Mark put up earlier, as a landscape architecture profession, we can actually cover most of them, if not all of them, in what's different ways, shapes, or forms. So that's why it's quite interesting to have this conversation amongst the institute. So thanks for that, Pam.
I just one other point with that, Matt. There is, and I think Anthony alluded, there is so much in this report, and it's all very easy to digest. And different professions or people can really see themselves in it and how they can apply it. And it really does apply to your profession for sure.
And as a national institute, we were quite proud, dare I say it, in the sense of how well some of our recent designs and older designs of some of our landscape-led infrastructure, how well it went in the flooding. But it's interesting, as you said yourself, like that was it's kind of surprised you see how we're doing in some of this work, whereas we think there's still a long way to go. So if we're thinking that this is good, we can push way beyond where we're at. So we should be bursting this bubble off the chart in that regard.
That's right, just like we are, and like Mark's talked about, we're really using it as an impetus for our work, just like you can.
Yeah. It's a good question for Anthony. So in relation to the report and comparing to other Indigenous population currently, excuse me, other Indigenous populations, how do Māori compare compared to other countries in terms of Indigenous population?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. As I indicated earlier, we in New Zealand there's a sentiment around how our Indigenous people fare relative to the Indigenous populations in other countries, and that sentiment generally states that we do it quite well. And I think that certainly, whilst that's true in some spaces, surprisingly for some, it's probably not as true in others. So in the report, across a number of measures, one in particular was inclusion of Māori or inclusion of Indigenous peoples in the workforce. There have been pretty clear efforts, I think, over the last probably 5 to 10 years to increase inclusion, improve inclusion of Māori in the workforce. And I use, for example, I know Auckland Council, Auckland Transport, and others in the Auckland Council family, and indeed in central government, have had a focus on broader outcomes in procurement and progressive procurement, which encourages or catalyses Māori activity in business. So that has opened up opportunities for Māori. So efforts are there and they are promising, but there's more to be done. And among the 5 Australian cities, Māori have, or across those cities, Māori have the highest proportion of managers, across those Indigenous populations. So that's a positive. Another positive being that Māori have the second highest number of professionals across those same Indigenous communities behind Melbourne. However, on the raw numbers, Māori in employment is 3% lower than the Indigenous populations from across those same cities. So, there's, as I said, there's progress being made, and we acknowledge that. But at the same time, there's plenty more work to be done. There is a less severe income or less profound income gap with Māori than with other Indigenous populations, but that gap between non-Indigenous Aucklanders and Māori Aucklanders is still wide and not necessarily showing any great signs of closing. House affordability, home affordability, unsurprisingly, is still a significant challenge for Māori, and exacerbated by the rising cost of living. In respect of higher education, Māori are middle of the pack across those Indigenous populations. However, that's where the narrowest gap actually exists. So we take that as a positive and a negative. What's interesting here, one of the things that came out of the report, and I had an inkling of this prior to being part of the development of the report, is that there is a higher number of business founders who are Māori, and a higher number of founders who are born outside of New Zealand. Now, one of the things I'm keen to do in the next round of these explorations is to go deeper on that. And one of the things, something else I do know, and I think we probably all know, is that the Māori population, or the Auckland's population, is young, brown, and Asian. And so, as an opportunity that comes out of the back of this, we can take that opportunity, or we can actually let it weigh on us if we look at the disparities that currently exist. So again, it's a potted selection of some of the comparisons between Indigenous New Zealanders and Indigenous populations across the peer cities, but on the whole, we probably come at around middle of the pack.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's particularly you're saying around the younger demographic around what the study has told us where we are now, and what that information is around a growing population, you've got to see it as an opportunity to grow and go with it. The benchmark's just a benchmark. We've got a line in the sand now. Let's go for it and let's see what we can grow, right? So, yeah. Mike, I've got a question for you around, I see a few questions starting to come into the chat too, thank you. It's sort of been alluded to in a question to Pam a second ago, but what do you see, based on the pillars that we had up on the screen before, what do you see the biggest opportunity for landscape architects to provide improvement to those different pillars?
I mean, the short answer is that's for landscape architects to decide. And what I'd encourage you guys to do is to sort of put a working group together to kind of go through it. But look, from other conversations I've had with kind of similar sorts of groups, there are three that stand out. One is place, as Pam was talking about. In that area, the report tells us we need more green and public space prioritised as part of new developments. So we're below our peers in terms of the share of green and public spaces that are occurring as part of new developments. In connectivity, we've got to have new travel patterns that boost active connections. So active connections as part of new developments or as part of architectural activities. Again, we're behind the watermark there. And then thirdly, in culture, we've got to boost more investment in urban spaces. So we don't do that well enough across the region, particularly. And actually, to the extent that there's been a focus on the city centre, the report was pretty clear that we've really got to improve amenity in the city centre too. But I think those are three things, Matthew, that sort of stuck out to me in those three pillars: place, connectivity, and culture. But look, I know other groups have done this. They've kind of like trawled through it and found the areas that appeal to them. And this is the good thing about this is, I mean, you could form a working group and change the unitary plan if you want to. But the good news is you can also pick up the insights and implement those in the work you're doing, right, in the actual projects that you're involved with too, and sort of draw on the insights from this and say, if you're trying to persuade a developer or a client to do something, say, well, the state of the city says you really should do this.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot of people taking heed of or information out of this and thinking, let's get going. Let's help out with this. So with that in mind, Pam, we've got a lot of landscape architects and landscape architecture firms who are deeply interested in the study and what it means. How do you get around the table? How do you get to that top table to be having the conversations that are actually going to be meaningful and are going to lead to outcomes that we're improving, long term?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you are, but I mean, I guess it's about being visible and, associating or connecting with your local council or economic development agency, or which would be Tātaki in Auckland, or Panuku, the urban region agency, because these organisations are looking at those future developments. And if I take two examples, in Auckland, one, we've been very involved with the development of southern Auckland, the Jury area, and put out a master plan that we developed with Arab. We had a large number of stakeholders, but yeah, we didn't have landscape architecture around that table. And certainly I think having your profession around the table would have certainly added to the master plan and what we came up with. Another one is Henderson. We're developing a creative precinct in Henderson, a decades-long project, which will be looking at how people interact with this a space with anchored tenants, Auckland Film Studios through to Corporate Art Space. We're working with Panuku around what their plans say, a cycle lane, but it's all about how people are going to be attracted to that area and use it, and it needs you guys there. So we've got an information evening next Thursday on the 23rd of November, if anybody is interested. But there will be a lot more about that. So yeah, I think get in contact and make those friends. The good people work in these places, and it's pretty easy if you're in Napier or Nelson or Northland, to connect and find someone good that you can get across what are the developments coming up into the future, or where are those interesting projects.
where the kind of the strategies are coming forward. In terms of that one next week, what was that? Is that specific to Henderson, or was that around?
That's specific to the Henderson creative region. What the vision is. Yeah.
And I got one last final question from my end, to you, Anthony, just around shedding some light into what the opportunities are for creating greater prosperity for Māori, but off the back of you saying, we've got a younger population. What can we do to help? What can be done? Sorry.
Yeah, well, I go back to my opening, and when I talked about the origins of the city, and I actually think that story is a story that everybody in Auckland should know, and not for any gratuitous reasons, but because it gives us the anchor, it gives us the understanding of why the Māori, the mana whenua, the tangata whenua population in Auckland is actually really, really critical to the foundations and the future of the city. So I think there's an opportunity amongst everybody on this call, including ourselves, to better leverage the cultural identity and better anchor our city in the origin story. So that's something that I think would be really, really good for us all to consider, and really understand how we bring that to life and who we use in order to bring that to life. And on that point, we a thing that's becoming more evident, and certainly in the spaces that I work in, is that Māori are business hungry. That particularly the younger population, the younger Māori populations here are business hungry. What we haven't had till now is visibility across the spaces that Māori are hungry in business in. And with the advent of the likes of Amotai, which is an organisation that brings together Māori-owned businesses and certifies them as Māori-owned businesses and connects them through to the likes of to buying organisations. What we're seeing is that Māori business interests are much broader than they have been considered in the past. I mean, 10 years ago, we didn't really know that tour architects didn't exist, for example. The Māori practice within Warren and Māni didn't exist, for example. Design Tribe did exist, but very few people knew who they were. And so what I'm saying here is that there are sectors, there are industries that Māori are involved in, and there's a deep Māori desire to become more active in those industries that will help to firstly bring the story of Tāmaki Makaurau to life, but in so doing continue to lift up the people who are most in need of being lifted. And all of the statistics tell us that that Māori, Pacifica, and other underserved communities are those.
There's a lot of energy in the landscape architecture around. Also, we've got members as part of Ngā Aho, and we've got Tū Tāunuku as well, bettering our design, our Māori design principles and how we're in its application. And just on the knowing the history, last year, so 2022, we had a wānanga up on Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Marae, and where we were invited onto Marae as an institute, and 150 of us landscape architects went that Monday morning, and it was an absolutely special moment where we just had kōrero around what we respectively, how we respect each other and what we can try and build upon. So it's something that's happening here in Tāmaki around building that relationship. So that's something that we would like to keep on going. So we did learn a lot about the history and understanding where we stand as in our profession. So there's a couple of questions which, Mark, I think you've put your hand up to answer around. Well, first one around sustainability. Do you want to have a respond to that?
I can. Yes, that's a great question from Stuart. And look, if I look at the report, I mean, the reason that we sort of lead the pack in sustainability is to some extent because of some of our innate attributes, in particular our water, right? That we actually, I mean, New Zealand, of course, internationally is well regarded in terms of the fact that so much of our energy is hydro. If I pull out some of the stats just to give context, so with this, Auckland has the second lowest rate of water consumption among major Asia Pacific cities. We have lower waste and water use relative to peers. We've got more solar potential. We've got quite a sustainable hospitality sector. We've got more research institutions committed to sustainability causes. So look, there's a series of things that are measured on the upside. The challenges, though, and this perhaps goes to Stuart's point in terms of delivery, others are ahead of us with the climate response. We've got fewer green and circular buildings compared to other cities. We have higher energy use in our buildings. And of course, we've got significantly lower active public transport, which contributes, as we know, pretty negatively. So I think it's always a challenge, kind of, when we say something's good or bad, is what does it mean? And I think the good thing about the report is it's quite specific about what's measured. And these are sort of international measures that are considered to be the ones that cities like us should be referencing. But the challenge is great. And one of the things Business of Cities said is that we will fall in sustainability if we don't take more action, particularly, as I mentioned before, on some of the aspirations in the climate response plan that the council's put together. And we know, for example, Auckland Transport says it's not funded to deliver transport side of that. So that's really a big constraint. But I suppose I've given a sense that there are still things that could be done, and perhaps in your area, green and circular buildings that might be perhaps outside landscape architecture. But there are other aspects of the climate response, I think, water reticulation, particularly. Those are things that can help us, that I think could keep us more strongly in the sustainability space.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. We've only got a minute to go, and is anyone on the panel think they could answer a question around digital twinning and innovation clusters very quickly? So it's what the key moves recommended for encouraging recommended for encouraging construction technology transfer, including Māori business.
Look, so the digital twin pilot will be not just something that kind of is in back offices. When that gets up, it'll have a gamified element to that. And what I mean by that is it'll have an area where the public and people can kind of plug and play in with that. Another thing that we'll actually be talking about in the quarterly update is an innovation development that Tātaki has underway, I think, a Trans-Tasman arrangement. Pam, did you want to speak about that?
Sure, Mark. So we are running a tech strategy, Tāmaki Makaurau, which has an emphasis on Māori and Pacifica businesses, and certainly developing homegrown talent. And we are actually, my next meeting, it's around how we build out an innovation framework for Auckland over the next period of time too. So a lot happening, as with all things, they take quite some time to actually then filter out into the open. But certainly that construction technology you're talking about, if there's companies or things you should know, think we should know about that could feed in and be supported through this tech plan that we've got, just let me know.
Great, thank you. And so we've used up our time. So I'd just like to extend a huge thank you to Anthony, Pam, and Mark for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been really enlightening off the back of reading the report, reading the study, and I really look forward to seeing how we as landscape architects can further, grow upon what was the benchmark and make our city better across the numerous facets that we can. As in our profession, but as also as citizens of the city. So yes, again, I'd like to say a huge thank you to you all. I will redistribute the link to the report for those. There's been a couple of questions in the chat around, hey, can we see it again? So yes, we'll get that out there so people can be familiar. And we'll try and reach out as a profession to the respective people involved. So yes, thanks very much again. I'd like to thank the audience for coming. We had a good turnout today. So let's build upon this. As I say, and get things going. And a little plug for the Institute. Remember to register for the NZILA conference, and which is upcoming in May 2024 in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington. The information should have landed in your inboxes yesterday. So kia ora, everyone. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next time. So thanks again.
Kia ora, Matthew. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Thank you.